Tonight, we confront a reality that has long been anticipated by defense strategists. A decisive moment unfolded not over a period of days, but in the span of mere minutes. Those minutes triggered urgent, frantic communications between Washington and Brussels. Those minutes unequivocally confirmed that the critical boundary everyone had hoped would remain secure has now been decisively breached. The action that occurred in the early hours was neither subtle nor ambiguous. Russia executed a calculated military move that directly and visibly expanded the scope of this conflict beyond the recognized borders of Ukraine. And when that line was crossed, Ukraine's reaction was immediate and unwavering. They responded with surgical precision, exceptional speed, and a clarity of purpose that demonstrated their full understanding of the monumental stakes involved. For weeks leading up to this event, there were distinct, though unofficial, signals that Russia was preparing an action outside its established pattern of aggression. Historically, Russia's pattern has been predictable. Escalate tensions, then pause. Issue aggressive posturing, then deny any significant change. Subtly reposition assets, then pretend the situation remains static. However, this week, that recognizable ritual suddenly ceased. Analysts monitoring activity in Brussels were the first to notice the change. Their data streams tracking Russian long-range aviation, critical satellite communications, and electronic emissions abruptly went silent. Experts who monitor Russia's strategic military activity know the indicators well: nighttime movement of fuel trucks, the expansion of security cordons around remote air bases, and a surge in encrypted communications just before a major loading or staging operation. Yet, over the last 48 hours, all these key signals went quiet. In the context of geopolitics, when Russia falls silent, it is seldom a sign of peace. It is usually the quiet moment that immediately precedes a significant military development. Early this morning, U.S. early warning systems detected what senior officials described as a synchronized and operational shift in Russia's launch posture. This involved the forward deployment of long-range strike aircraft into operational ready positions, a maneuver not witnessed since the height of the Crimea crisis nearly a decade ago. These are not assets Russia deploys casually. They are not used for routine training or for signaling mere diplomatic displeasure. When Russia moves these powerful platforms, it is communicating one of three possibilities: overt escalation, strategic deterrence, or a probing test to assess the speed of the Western response. Analysts were initially uncertain of the exact category, as it could have been one or even all three simultaneously, but what was certain was that Russia had unilaterally changed its strategic military posture. When a nuclear-armed state executes such a shift without warning, Washington, London, and Brussels instantly move to the highest level of alert. The internal warning issued by NATO late in the afternoon was far from routine. It was neither symbolic nor a mere procedural update. It was a clear, urgent directive. Officials involved in the rapid response virtual briefings described Russia's action as highly destabilizing, fundamentally unpredictable, and most critically, operationally meaningful. That technical phrase is reserved for maneuvers that possess the potential to translate into tangible, real-world consequences if left unchecked by the West or NATO. But here is the defining factor that makes this specific moment unique. Deterrence only succeeds if the target nation pauses long enough to be deterred. Ukraine did not pause. They did not hesitate. Their counter-response was initiated in less than an hour, one of the fastest and most coordinated reaction sequences observed throughout the duration of this conflict. Within minutes of Russia's posture change being confirmed, Ukrainian forces rapidly began preparing a counterstrike. These were not standard mobile artillery maneuvers. These involved long-range, high-precision systems that Ukraine specifically reserves for moments when they recognize a strategic window is closing, when they understand they must act immediately before Russia finalizes its planned action. Tonight, senior defense officials have confirmed that Ukraine launched a coordinated series of precision strikes against three critical Russian military locations believed to be integral to the posture shift. One key target included a launch support facility that had recently been brought to a heightened state of alert, which analysts had been tracking with increasing concern. Ukraine executed its counterstrike before Russia could bring its assets fully online. They successfully hit the command node responsible for coordinating the aircraft movement. They struck a major logistics hub suspected of feeding fuel and hardware into the operational area, and they hit a forward radar station, likely preparing to assist in long-range targeting coordination. In essence, Ukraine targeted and disabled the essential components, the structural backbone of the escalatory system Russia was attempting to activate. This is precisely why the NATO warning was so urgent. Russia's move was not mere symbolism. It was the initiation of an actionable military sequence, the very type of shift that, if completed, could have enabled a devastating strike, or at least posed a highly credible threat towards U.S. or NATO facilities located in Europe. Ukraine understood this existential threat. Their response was neither reckless nor impulsive. It was carefully calculated. They did not retaliate against civilian areas. They did not waste valuable firepower on symbolic targets. They focused their firepower on the tactical core of Russia's attempted escalation. Here is where the narrative becomes even more alarming. Western intelligence analysts now hypothesize that Russia's latest move may have been a design test of the resilience and response speed of Ukraine and its allies. Russia intended to probe whether Ukraine would exhibit hesitation, whether they were suffering from operational fatigue, or whether Western support had begun to critically erode. But that is clearly not what happened. Ukraine exhibited no hesitation. They acted decisively in a manner that forced even the Russian command to take notice. Intelligence analysts, speaking on the condition of anonymity, described Russia's posture shift as a pressure test, intended to assess Ukraine's capability to respond under extremely short-notice conditions. Ukraine proved today that it remains profoundly adaptive and highly responsive. Their counterstrikes were not only timely, but their precision was such that analysts were surprised by the tight synchronization with Russia's own movement schedule. That precision and timing matter immensely. It demonstrates that Ukraine is not operating defensively or blindly. They have achieved the capability to proactively interpret Russian signals in real time and are prepared to neutralize the threat before it can develop into full-scale escalation. As the day progressed, further details emerged regarding the scope and coordination of Ukraine's defensive response. Air defense units successfully coordinated suppression fire against key Russian counter-battery systems, forcing immediate Russian repositioning. Drone operators effectively targeted a vital rail junction that had been transporting heavy equipment toward forward airfields over the preceding 72 hours. Furthermore, Ukrainian special operations units operating covertly deep behind the lines reportedly disrupted critical communications relays that Russia depended upon for command and control of its escalating activity. This was not a symbolic exchange. It was not a simple, reciprocal, retaliatory gesture. It was the calculated, preemptive dismantling of a Russian escalatory sequence. Disrupting this sequence is the one military challenge Russia has consistently failed to counter since the earliest phases of this conflict. Every time Russia attempts to expand the geographical battlefield, Ukraine has responded with an action that compels Moscow to halt, rebuild, rethink, and recalibrate its strategy. Recent reports further confirm this pattern of adaptation. According to Ukrainian officials, Russia has launched over 650 drones and 51 missiles in recent wide-ranging attacks. Yet, Ukrainian defense forces successfully neutralized the vast majority of these aerial threats. It is crucial to recall Russia's initial assumptions. They were convinced that Ukraine would quickly collapse under sustained pressure. They believed that Western support would inevitably dwindle and dry up. They were confident that Ukraine would cease to respond effectively as the war dragged into its later stages. But tonight, the exact opposite is unfolding. Ukraine is not collapsing. They are adapting and innovating. Western support is not fading. It is actively being reshaped and strengthened. And far from slowing down operationally, Ukraine's military is becoming faster, significantly more coordinated, and more capable of proactively addressing Russian advances before they can reach maturity. What renders this moment particularly dangerous and significant is the political context surrounding Russia's decision to escalate. This action occurred at a time when Vladimir Putin is demonstrably under immense internal pressure. Hardliners within the government demand immediate escalation. Moderates argue for strategic stabilization. Military elites demand a clearer, unified strategy. Economic advisors urgently require relief from sanctions that are suffocating the domestic economy. Putin is attempting to balance all these competing demands while managing a military apparatus that is under severe strain. When leaders in such precarious positions make sudden, aggressive moves, they rarely do so from a position of absolute strength. They act from a position of profound vulnerability and strategic pressure. NATO's official public statement, now distributed across all allied capitals, was carefully crafted to signal that the alliance will not permit Russian posturing near U.S. or NATO bases to go unchallenged or ignored. Officials stated plainly that Russia's maneuver was inconsistent with stable state military behavior. This is cautious diplomatic phrasing for a far sharper internal reality. Russia crossed a serious boundary, and you do not hear this specific tone from NATO leadership unless a deeply serious crisis is unfolding behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky addressed his nation tonight with a measured, determined, and almost surgical speech. He stated that Russia believed they would not answer quickly, and they were wrong. He affirmed that Ukraine will not allow escalation to begin on Russia's terms. And he declared that Ukraine will defend every inch of their territory and every partner threatened by the shadow of this war. These were not mere rhetorical flourishes. These were direct, potent statements from a leader who understands precisely how high the strategic stakes have been raised. What makes this situation even more concerning is the fact that Russia's posture shift was not an isolated event. Coinciding with the primary escalation, Belarus repositioned aviation assets. A major Russian naval group altered its pattern in the Black Sea, and Russian-based cyber units significantly increased probing activity directed toward Western military networks. All of these coordinated actions occurred within the same narrow 12-hour window. When Russia moves multiple strategic pieces simultaneously, the action is never random. It is coordinated. It means something much larger is actively underway. Analysts are now actively considering several possibilities. One possibility is that Russia was simply preparing a theatrical show of force intended purely to intimidate the NATO alliance. Another is that Russia was attempting to test whether Ukraine's rapid response capability had degraded over time. And a third possibility, the one causing the most serious concern among Western officials, is that Russia was preparing to stage a limited strike threat against a U.S.-affiliated facility overseas to measure Washington's immediate reaction. But Ukraine's decisive response today effectively eliminated that third option from the table. They did not allow for delay. They did not allow Russia to complete its posture shift unchallenged. They acted decisively. The reality on the ground continues to be relentlessly brutal. Russia has launched more than 19,000 missiles and over 14,700 attack drones at Ukraine since late 2022, creating what military experts describe as a cruel, ongoing logic of attrition. Yet, Ukraine has simultaneously developed sophisticated countermeasures and highly effective response capabilities. What the world is observing now is a critical test of global resolve. Russia's objective is to see precisely how far it can push. Ukraine's objective is to demonstrate that escalation will not go unchallenged. NATO's objective is to prevent any Russian maneuver from threatening its own installations. And the United States' objective is to prevent this regional conflict from dangerously expanding into something far more vast and uncontrollable. Tonight, sources close to NATO command indicate they are monitoring Russian activity with extreme scrutiny. They report that Russia has begun repositioning certain support units back toward their original locations. They also note that Russia's decision to raise its posture earlier today was likely a broader strategy designed to test Ukraine's reaction speed and resilience. But Ukraine is not yielding. Ukraine is not hesitating. Their counter-response today, which was precise, decisive, and methodically executed, successfully transmitted a clear message to Russia that escalation will be met with direct and immediate consequence. And it sent an equally important message to the West, that Ukraine remains fully capable of protecting itself and countering Russian moves before they fully materialize as an unavoidable threat. The broader pattern clearly reveals Ukraine's evolving strategic maturity. This demonstration of coordinated response, precision strikes, and preemptive action represents a new, dangerous, and demanding phase in modern warfare. One truth is now undeniable. Russia tested a line. Ukraine struck back immediately. And now the world is waiting to see what the next move will be. Because in this conflict, strategic silence is not the same as peace. It is preparation. And every move, every counter move brings us closer to understanding whether the future will be defined by further escalation or by a difficult path toward diplomacy. The next 48 hours will be strategically critical.